every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. It's summer in Los Angeles, 1985. The air is thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket of heat and smog that doesn't lift even after the sun sinks below the Pacific. In the sprawling suburbs of the San Gabriel Valley, the Santa Monica Mountains, and the maze of neighborhoods that make up the City of Angels, a collective ritual begins as dusk falls. Windows are slammed shut, deadbolts are thrown, security bars are latched. The evening news has become a nightly horror story, and the monster isn't confined to the movie screen. He's real, and he comes in the night. This isn't the fear of a targeted threat, of a specific danger with a name and a motive. This is something more primal, more insidious. It is the fear of the random, the unpredictable, the knowledge that locks may not matter, that no one is safe. The victim could be an elderly woman living alone, or a young couple asleep in their bed. It could be a family with children. The weapon could be a gun, a knife, a tire iron. The motive, a confusing tangle of robbery, assault, and something far darker, often punctuated by a hastily scrawled pentagram, a mark of allegiance to an evil most people only read about. The city holds its breath. Gun sales soar. Neighborhood watch groups patrol with flashlights and baseball bats, peering into the shadows. People try to sleep in shifts. The sound of a creaking floorboard or a rattling window pane becomes a source of pure adrenaline. The monster has a name given to him by the press. The Night Stalker, but he has no face, no pattern, no discernible logic. He is a phantom, a whisper of violence that has paralyzed millions. His greatest weapon isn't a firearm or a blade. It is the terror he manufactures, a suffocating psychological warfare waged against an entire metropolis. Today, we are not just examining the crimes of a serial killer. We are dissecting the unique anatomy of that fear. We will explore how one man, Richard Ramirez, a chaotic and disorganized predator, managed to hold one of the world's largest cities hostage through sheer unpredictability. This is the story of how his reign of terror was not ended by a brilliant detective's deduction in a smoke-filled room, but by the very people he terrorized on a hot Saturday morning in an explosive act of communal defiance. This is the anatomy of a city under siege. Our story begins not in the blazing summer of 1985, but more than a year earlier, on a cool evening in June of 1984. In the Glassell Park neighborhood of Los Angeles, a 79-year-old widow named Jenny Vinkow lived a quiet life in her small apartment. On the night of June 28th, she went to bed, likely feeling secure in the home she had known for years. She would not wake up. A prowler slipped into her home through an unlocked window, a simple act of carelessness that would have devastating consequences. He found Jenny in her bed, stabbed her repeatedly, and nearly decapitated her. The killer left little behind, and the crime, while brutal, was initially seen by the Los Angeles Police Department as a tragic but isolated home invasion robbery gone wrong. It was a single horrifying data point with no connection to anything else. For 9 months, the ghost of Jenny Vinkow's killer remained silent. The city moved on, but the entity that had murdered her was not dormant. It was evolving. On March 17, 1985, in the suburb of Rosemead, a young woman named Maria Hernandez was returning home. As she pulled into the garage of her condominium complex, a man dressed in black emerged from the shadows. He pointed a pistol at her and demanded money. When she insisted she had none, he didn't run. He raised the gun and fired. The bullet struck the car keys she was holding up in a defensive gesture, deflecting the round away from her head and into her hand. She fell to the ground, playing dead as the man entered her home. Inside was her roommate, 34-year-old Dale Okazaki. The man shot her once in the forehead, killing her instantly. He then ransacked the apartment before fleeing. Maria Hernandez, wounded but alive, had survived. She had seen him. She would later provide police with the first description of the killer: a tall, lanky man with wild hair, a gaunt face, and terribly stained, decaying teeth. This detail, the teeth, would become a crucial, recurring element in witness descriptions. The dental hygiene of the devil was, it seemed, quite poor. The connection between the Okazaki murder and the Vincow murder was not immediately apparent. One was a shooting, the other a stabbing. One victim was young, the other elderly. They were miles apart. To law enforcement, they were two separate cases, two different files. But the killer was just getting started. 10 days later, on March 27th, in Whittier, he struck again. This time, he entered the home of 64-year-old Vincent Zazzara and his 44-year-old wife, Maxine. The attack was one of breathtaking savagery. Vincent was shot in the head. Maxine was beaten, stabbed, and her eyes were gouged out. Before leaving, the killer used her lipstick to draw a pentagram on her thigh and another on the wall of the bedroom. Now the investigators had something that linked the crimes. The sheer brutality, the satanic element, the apparent lack of motive beyond violence itself. Detectives began to suspect they were not dealing with multiple criminals, but with one man. A new task force was formed, headed by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department's most respected homicide detective, Frank Salerno. Salerno was legendary, having been one of the lead investigators on the Hillside Strangler case in the late 1970s. He was methodical, patient, and brilliant. He was paired with a younger, energetic detective named Gil Carrillo. Together, they were tasked with hunting a predator who seemed to have no rules. The spring and summer of 1985 would become a blur of violence. The killer, whom the press began calling the Valley Intruder due to a string of attacks in the San Gabriel Valley, moved with a terrifying velocity. His victim profile was non-existent. He attacked men, women, and children. He attacked people of different races and economic backgrounds. His method of entry was simple and effective. He looked for an open window or an unlocked door, a moment of lapsed security in the sweltering heat. He was an opportunist of the highest order. On May 14th, he broke into the home of Bill Doy, 66, and his wife, Lillian, 56, in Monterey Park. He bound Bill and systematically raped and beat Lillian before ransacking their home for valuables. He left Bill Doy with such severe brain damage that he would later die in the hospital. The attacks continued, each one a postcard from hell. An 83-year-old woman and her 81-year-old sister beaten with a hammer. A 29-year-old woman, Patty Higgins, abducted from her home, raped, and forced to swear allegiance to Satan. She survived, but the psychological scars would be permanent. With each new crime scene, Salerno and Carrillo gathered more clues, but a clear picture of the man remained elusive. They had a vague physical description. They had evidence of his satanic leanings. They found a single, repeating shoe print at several scenes, an Avia brand athletic shoe, size 11.5. This was a solid lead, but the shoe was a popular model, sold at thousands of stores. They recovered bullets and shell casings, but ballistics could only confirm that the same .22 caliber handgun was used in some of the attacks. He also used other weapons, adding to the confusion. The killer was a specter, defined only by the carnage he left behind. The media frenzy grew with each passing week. The Valley Intruder moniker was replaced by a more menacing name that would stick. The Night Stalker, the name itself, added to the mythology and the terror. It invoked a supernatural, almost vampiric quality. He was no longer just a man. He was a boogeyman come to life, and the entire city was his hunting ground. The name was both a product of the media and a catalyst for the fear. It gave a label to the shapeless anxiety that had gripped Los Angeles. As the summer wore on, the attacks became more frequent, more audacious. On July 20th, he drove north to Sun Valley. There, he entered the home of Max and Leila Knighting. He shot both of them in the head with a .22 caliber pistol, then mutilated their bodies with a knife. He ransacked their home, taking what little valuables he could find, and then vanished back into the night. Just hours later, he was miles away in Glendale, breaking into the home of the Pan family. He shot and killed Chainarong Pan, a 32-year-old electronics engineer. He then raped Pan's wife, Sakima, and shot their 8-year-old son. Miraculously, both Sakima and her son survived. The Pan case provided another crucial piece of information. Sakima Pan was able to give a detailed description of the attacker, corroborating the gaunt features, the wild hair, and the horrifying rotten teeth. The composite sketch was updated, becoming slightly clearer, but it was still the face of a ghost. The geographic spread of the attacks was baffling. Sun Valley, Glendale, Monterey Park, Whittier, Rosemead. The killer seemed to move effortlessly across the vast, tangled freeway system of Southern California, leaving terror in his wake. For Salerno and Carrillo, the investigation was a frustrating battle against chaos. They were hunting a man who left behind a storm of forensic evidence, fingerprints, shoe prints, ballistics, but they had no suspect to match it against. In the 1980s, police databases were not the interconnected, lightning-fast systems they are today. A fingerprint was only useful if you already had a suspect in custody whose prints you could compare it to. They had dozens of latent prints lifted from the crime scenes, sitting in evidence bags, useless until they had a name. The pressure on the task force was immense. The public was terrified, and local politicians were demanding answers. Los Angeles Mayor Tom Bradley held press conferences urging calm, but his words were drowned out by the nightly news reports detailing the stalker's latest atrocities. The city was on edge, a tinderbox of fear waiting for a spark. The police were seen as helpless, always one step behind a predator who seemed to be everywhere at once. He was a force of nature, a human hurricane, and no one knew where he would strike next. The anatomy of the fear Ramirez created was unique because it defied the typical serial killer script. Killers like Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy had a type. They hunted specific victims in specific ways. This created a horrifying but understandable pattern. If you didn't fit the profile, you could tell yourself you were relatively safe. Ramirez offered no such comfort. His victims were young and old, male and female, of various ethnicities, living in different neighborhoods. The randomness was the key. It meant that everyone was a potential target. The feeling of safety in one's own home, the most basic sense of security, was systematically dismantled night after night across millions of households. This universal vulnerability was Ramirez's most profound psychological impact on the city. He didn't just kill people, he murdered the city's sense of normalcy. The simple act of leaving a window open to catch a cool night breeze became a potentially fatal mistake. The sound of a dog barking in the distance took on a sinister new meaning. He had turned every home into a potential crime scene, and every citizen into a potential victim. This was the true nature of his terror. By August 1985, the Night Stalker's reign seemed unstoppable. He had been killing and assaulting for over a year, and the police seemed no closer to catching him. On August 6th, he claimed 2 more victims in Northridge. On August 8th, another 2 in Diamond Bar. The pace was accelerating, the brutality undiminished. It felt to many that the summer of fear would never end. But the killer, for all his cunning and savagery, was getting sloppy. His escalating crimes increased the probability of a mistake, a single loose thread that could unravel his entire bloody tapestry. That mistake was about to happen. On the evening of August 24, 1985, a young couple in the suburban community of Mission Viejo, south of Los Angeles in Orange County, were settling in for the night. The man, James Ramirez, was 27. His fiancée, who has requested to remain anonymous and is often referred to by the name Inez Erickson in court documents, was 29. They were in their bedroom when a man silently entered through an unlocked sliding glass door. It was Richard Ramirez. He brandished a pistol, and what followed was the familiar, horrifying script. He bound James with plastic handcuffs, telling him to keep his eyes closed and not to look at him. He then took Inez into another room, where he bound her and assaulted her. He forced her to profess her love for Satan. After ransacking the house for money and jewelry, he returned to the bedroom where James was tied up. He placed the muzzle of the gun against James's head and fired. But in a moment that can only be described as a miracle, James Ramirez instinctively moved his head at the last possible second. The bullet, a small .22 caliber round, struck him a glancing blow, ricocheting off his skull rather than penetrating it. He was grievously wounded, but he was alive. Ramirez, believing he had killed the man, turned his attention back to Inez. He told her he was going to leave, but that she must not call the police, for Satan would be watching her. He then slipped out of the house and disappeared. Inez managed to free herself, and discovered that James was, against all odds, still breathing. She called for help, but the most critical part of the encounter was yet to come. As Ramirez had been leaving, James, despite his injury and the killer's warning, had managed to peek out the window. He saw the stalker get into his car and drive away. It was a beat-up distinctive vehicle, an orange Toyota station wagon. He had also caught a glimpse of the license plate. When police arrived, they had their single biggest break of the entire investigation. For the first time, they had a vehicle linked directly to the Night Stalker. A bolo, be on the lookout, was issued for an orange Toyota station wagon. For days, police across Southern California pulled over every matching vehicle they saw, but the stalker's car remained elusive. It seemed the lead might be a dead end. Then, 4 days later, on August 28th, a sharp-eyed 13-year-old boy in the Wilshire Center neighborhood of Los Angeles spotted a suspicious car. It was an orange Toyota station wagon, driving slowly, the driver seeming to case the neighborhood. The boy, remembering the news reports, wrote down the license plate number. He gave it to his parents, who called the police. The police ran the plates. It came back as stolen. Officers descended on the area and found the car abandoned near a bus station. The car was a treasure trove of evidence. Inside, investigators found items stolen from several of the stalker's victims. But the most important discovery came from the rearview mirror. A single, clear fingerprint. The print was rushed to the forensics lab. At this time, California had just implemented a revolutionary new piece of technology. The Automated Fingerprint Identification System, or AFIS. It was a massive computerized database containing the fingerprints of hundreds of thousands of individuals who had been arrested in the state. Previously, matching a print from a crime scene was a painstaking manual process that could take months if it was possible at all. An investigator had to have a suspect in mind to do a comparison, but AFIS could take a single unknown print and search the entire database for a match in a matter of hours or even minutes. The latent print from the Toyota's mirror was fed into the system. The machine whirred to life, its algorithms sifting through millions of data points. And then it found a match. The print belonged to a 25-year-old drifter from El Paso, Texas, named Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez. He had a rap sheet in California for petty theft and drug possession. The system pulled up his file, complete with a grainy black-and-white booking photo. The detectives stared at the image, the gaunt, hollowed-out cheeks, the wild, dark hair, the intense, predatory eyes. It was him. The ghost finally had a face. Frank Salerno and Gil Carrillo finally had their man's name. The discovery was electrifying. On the evening of Friday, August 30th, 1985, law enforcement made a bold and, some argued, risky decision. They released Richard Ramirez's mugshot to the media. That night, every television station and every early edition of the next day's newspapers featured the same chilling photograph. The headline was unambiguous. "This is the Night Stalker." The message to the public was clear. A killer is among us, and this is what he looks like. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The shapeless fear that had haunted the city for months was now given a concrete form. The monster had a name and a face, and now everyone was looking for him. The strategy turned every citizen in Southern California into a potential detective. It was a massive, citywide manhunt, and the quarry was unaware that his identity had been compromised. At that very moment, Richard Ramirez was on a bus, heading from Arizona back to Los Angeles. He had gone to visit his brother but was returning. Likely to continue his reign of terror, he was completely oblivious to the fact that his face was plastered on every television screen and newspaper front page in the city he was about to enter. He was a dead man walking, and he didn't even know it. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic and unlikely captures in the history of American crime. To understand the chaos that Richard Ramirez unleashed, one must first understand the man himself. He was not a sophisticated, brilliant monster like Hannibal Lecter. He was a product of a deeply dysfunctional and violent upbringing. Born in El Paso, Texas, in 1960, he was the youngest of 5 children. His early life was marked by trauma. As a toddler, he suffered a serious head injury when a dresser fell on him. At age 6, he was knocked unconscious by a swing, an injury that some have speculated may have caused brain damage and contributed to the epileptic seizures he experienced as a youth. His father was known to be physically abusive, prone to fits of rage. But the most profoundly damaging influence in Richard's young life was his older cousin, Miguel "Mike" Ramirez. Mike was a Green Beret who had recently returned from the war in Vietnam. He was profoundly disturbed by his combat experiences, and he brought the war home with him. He would show his young cousin graphic Polaroid photographs he had taken of Vietnamese women he had brutalized and killed. He taught Richard about military commando techniques, how to kill silently, and boasted of his capacity for violence. Mike was also a devotee of Satanism and a heavy drug user, habits he passed on to his impressionable young cousin. Richard began sniffing glue and smoking marijuana at an early age, dropping out of high school and spiraling into a life of petty crime. The most formative event occurred when Richard was just 13 years old. He was present when Mike, during a domestic dispute, shot and killed his own wife, Jessie. The gunshot was fired at point-blank range, and Richard was reportedly splattered with her blood. This singular event, witnessing a brutal, intimate murder committed by his idol and mentor, was a psychological point of no return. By his late teens and early 20s, Ramirez had moved to California, living a transient life funded by burglaries. He was a loner, drifting through the seedy underbelly of Los Angeles, sleeping in cheap hotels or stolen cars, his mind fueled by a cocktail of cocaine, LSD, and an obsession with Satanism and heavy metal music, particularly the band AC/DC, whose song Night Prowler he considered an anthem. He was a creature of impulse and base desires, devoid of empathy, shaped by a lifetime of violence and trauma into a perfect killing machine. He was not a planner. He did not stalk his victims for weeks or meticulously prepare his attacks. He was an opportunistic hunter, guided by whim and circumstance. He would wander neighborhoods at night, looking for the easy score, the open window, the unlocked door. This disorganization is precisely what made him so terrifying and so difficult to catch. Criminal profilers struggled because they were looking for a logical pattern where none existed. Ramirez's only pattern was chaos itself. On the morning of Saturday, August 31, 1985, Richard Ramirez stepped off a bus into downtown Los Angeles. He was unaware of the firestorm that had erupted around his identity. He walked into a liquor store, and there, on the front page of a Spanish-language newspaper, he saw his own face staring back at him. The headline confirmed his worst fears. He was recognized almost immediately by an elderly woman in the store. She began to scream his name. Panic set in. Ramirez bolted from the store and began to run. His plan, as far as he had one, was to get out of the city, to escape to his brother's place in Arizona. He needed a car. He ran towards the freeway, where he saw a woman in her car and tried to pull her out. She fought back, screaming. Her screams drew attention. A crowd was beginning to form. He abandoned the attempt and ran into a residential neighborhood in East Los Angeles, a predominantly Hispanic community. He vaulted over a fence into a backyard and tried to carjack another vehicle, this one a red Ford Mustang. The owner of the car, a man named Faustino Pinnon, was underneath it, working on the engine. Ramirez demanded the keys. Pinnon's wife, Angelina, heard the commotion from the house and ran outside, screaming for help. Ramirez, increasingly desperate, gave up and continued to flee on foot. By now, the neighborhood was fully alerted. A group of residents, hearing the screams and recognizing the now infamous face from the news, began to give chase. This was not a hesitant, fearful crowd. This was a community taking matters into its own hands. The chase spilled out onto the street. One man, Jose Burgoyne, grabbed a steel post from a chain-link fence he was installing and ran after Ramirez. Ramirez ran towards another house where a man named Manuel de la Torre was in his front yard with his wife. He again tried to get car keys, but de la Torre fought back. As they struggled, Jose Burgoyne caught up and struck Ramirez over the head with the steel pipe. The blow dazed him. Another man, Manuel's father, joined the fray. The group of citizens, now a determined mob, surrounded the dazed and bleeding Night Stalker. They kicked him, they punched him, they held him down. They were releasing months of pent-up fear and rage upon the man who had been its source. The terror Ramirez had sown across Los Angeles had finally found its target, and it was being returned to him tenfold, not by trained police officers, but by the very people he had considered his prey. They beat him until the police, alerted by a flood of frantic calls, arrived on the scene. The officers pulled the citizens off the bloodied, semi-conscious man on the pavement. One officer, recognizing him, leaned down and confirmed his identity. As they cuffed him, Ramirez reportedly uttered his first words to law enforcement, "Thank God you came." The capture of the Night Stalker was a moment of profound catharsis for the city of Los Angeles. The image of the terrifying predator being subdued by a group of ordinary people was broadcast around the world. The monster had been brought down, not in a hail of police gunfire, but by the courage and fury of a neighborhood that refused to be terrorized any longer. The summer of fear was finally over. The legal proceedings that followed were as chaotic and sensational as the crimes themselves. Ramirez's trial began in July of 1988 and would become one of the longest and most expensive in California history. The security was unprecedented. A metal detector was installed outside the courtroom, and sharpshooters were posted on nearby rooftops. Ramirez himself reveled in the attention, turning the trial into a macabre spectacle. On his first court appearance, he raised a hand upon which he had drawn a pentagram, and yelled, "Hail Satan!" He smirked at the families of his victims. He sneered at the cameras. He often appeared in court wearing dark sunglasses, projecting an air of rock star arrogance. A bizarre cult of personality grew around him. A small group of women, captivated by his dark charisma, became courtroom groupies, sending him letters and attending the trial daily. One of them, a freelance magazine editor named Doreen Leoy, would eventually marry him in prison. The prosecution, led by Deputy District Attorney Phil Halpin, methodically laid out the case against him. They presented an avalanche of evidence. The fingerprint from the Toyota, the Avia shoe print matches, ballistics evidence linking him to multiple crime scenes, and a mountain of stolen property recovered from his belongings, and from pawn shops he frequented. But the most powerful testimony came from the survivors. One by one, they took the stand, facing the man who had invaded their homes and their lives, and identified him as their attacker. Their stories, told with courage and emotion, painted a devastating portrait of his cruelty. The trial lasted for over a year. The jury heard testimony related to 43 separate charges, including 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 sexual assault charges, and 14 burglary charges. On September 20, 1989, after weeks of deliberation, the jury found Richard Ramirez guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent, a stark contrast to the circus-like atmosphere of the preceding months. Ramirez showed no emotion. As he was led out of the courtroom, he turned to the reporters and muttered, "Big deal. Death always comes with the territory. I'll see you in Disneyland." On November 7, 1989, he was formally sentenced. The judge imposed 19 death sentences. Ramirez responded with another rambling, defiant speech, telling the court, "You don't understand me. You are not expected to. You are not capable of it. I am beyond your experience. I am beyond good and evil. I will be avenged. Lucifer dwells in us all." Richard Ramirez was sent to California's San Quentin State Prison to await execution on death row. He would spend the next 23 years there, a caged animal, the subject of countless books, documentaries, and morbid fascination. He never expressed remorse for his crimes. He reveled in his infamy, corresponding with his admirers and granting occasional interviews in which he continued to profess his satanic beliefs. His execution never came. California's death penalty system is notoriously slow, mired in endless appeals. On June 7, 2013, at the age of 53, Richard Ramirez died from complications of B-cell lymphoma. The man who had brought so much death and terror to others died a quiet, clinical death in a hospital bed, his reign of terror ending not with a jolt of electricity or a lethal injection, but with the mundane failure of his own body. In the end, we must return to our central theme, the anatomy of fear. What made Richard Ramirez a uniquely terrifying figure in the pantheon of serial killers? It was not his intelligence, his organization, or his charm. He had none of these things. It was his utter randomness, his lack of a discernible script. Most serial predators, even the most monstrous, operate within a certain set of parameters, a twisted logic that gives their crimes a terrifying consistency. They have a type, a ritual, a geographic comfort zone. This predictability, however horrifying, offers a sliver of psychological distance for the general public. Ramirez offered no such comfort. His chaos was his signature. By refusing to adhere to any pattern, he made everyone a potential victim. The elderly woman, the young child, the married couple, all were equal in his predatory gaze. His weapon could be a gun, a knife, a hammer, a tire iron. His motive could be robbery, sexual assault, or simply the thrill of murder. This unpredictability amplified the fear exponentially. He was a human embodiment of a natural disaster, a tornado that could touch down anywhere, at any time, for no reason at all. His use of satanic symbolism was a masterstroke of psychological warfare, whether intentional or not. The pentagrams, the demands to swear to Satan, tapped into a deep primal fear within the cultural consciousness. It elevated him from a common, albeit vicious, criminal into something more. He wasn't just a burglar or a killer. He was an agent of pure evil, a disciple of the devil himself. This gave his crimes a dimension of metaphysical horror that other killers lacked. He wasn't just breaking into homes. He was violating the sacred, bringing a fight between good and evil into the bedrooms of suburban Los Angeles. Yet, the ultimate lesson from the story of the Night Stalker may not be about the power of fear, but about its limits. For months, he held a city of millions in his thrall. But in the end, his undoing came not from a single brilliant detective, but from a mosaic of ordinary people. The 13-year-old boy who spotted the suspicious car, the woman in the liquor store who screamed, the neighbors in East Los Angeles who heard the cries for help and ran towards the danger, not away from it, the men who, armed with nothing more than a steel pipe and righteous fury, subdued the monster. The story of Richard Ramirez is a testament to the fact that even the most profound terror has a breaking point. On that hot August morning, the fear he had so carefully cultivated finally curdled into rage, and a community decided it would no longer be prey. The anatomy of fear is complex and powerful, but the anatomy of courage, it turns out, can be as simple as a group of neighbors refusing to stand by while evil runs down their street. In his wake, Ramirez left not just a string of broken lives and grieving families, but a permanent scar on the psyche of a city. He redefined the meaning of random violence and proved that the deepest terror comes not from a monster with a plan, but from the chaos that waits just outside a window left unlocked on a hot summer night. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.